I didn't even know. Thank you very much. Start the live streaming?
Yeah, the audio is just not coming through right.
Okay, then I'll go get started. Welcome to the October meeting of the Baton Rouge Astronomical Society. This evening, our talk is going to be given by one of our founders, Craig Brendan. He helped start the group 43 years ago. And his subject is going to be on finder scopes, I believe, right? So anyway, here is Craig. Craig?
Well, let's see how it works. I'll try not to spill this coffee all over my finders here. I was looking, I thought for sure we had a Telerad back there. Is anybody
Just take one off the 10.
know where it might be? Because I know we had one at one time in a box back there.
Ben's going to go find one for you, so keep going.
Well, I'm not going to worry about it. Most of the people around here that use a telescope have seen a Telerad. And you can go online and just see what they look like. But the first thing I'm going to warn you about is you're going to be looking at me and not a nice PowerPoint, okay? So that's up to you. You might want to just turn down the screen, go to sleep, whatever it takes. Ooh! Thank you. Where did you find
Somebody
it?
left it on.
Which was that, the 12 inch?
Okay.
See, I turned the 10
Now
inch
I'm
off.
set. I have everything I need. Okay. This is going to be sort of a show and tell. Like, remember elementary school, you brought something in and you showed people, or you talked about your vacation. You went to Lava Land, for instance. I went to, I can't believe how many different types of finders there are nowadays. When I was growing up as a kid, I got my first real telescope, which was a 6-inch. I built it myself mostly. A 6-inch Edmunds back in about that would have been about 1960. A couple of years before we moved to New Orleans at the time. And had much darker skies. We were south of Seattle. And I could actually go in my backyard and still see the Milky Way, for instance, things like that. And it was great to have a nice telescope. Now, I actually made an outline, but when I was a teacher, you know what I did with outlines usually? I just took and tossed them. If you don't know it well enough, you probably shouldn't be talking about it. But the point is, I will try to follow it. And for anybody who's interested at the end of this talk, I have, or you can have it now if you'd like, if you want to pass these around. These are outlines. Okay?
I was just gonna say, talk about the program, this has
I'm not familiar with that. It's all my program. Okay, thank
the
you.
record.
Could somebody just pass these out to anybody who wants one? I made plenty of copies, but you can actually write notes on there or not, and then you can tell if I get off topic also. Anyway, the topic for this evening is using a finder scope. Now, a lot of people think, a finder scope, how much do you have to know about a finder scope? Well, it turns out for somebody who just getting started into astronomy, buys his first telescope, they get a finder scope. And it usually looks, here it is. This is what they usually get. Does anybody recognize this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the best finder scope that was ever made to be thrown in the trash can. Let me explain something to you. A good finder scope, there's several features about it. One, it doesn't use plastic lenses. Number two, if you look inside of this thing, you will discover that there's a light stop built in, which should be down here someplace, so you let a lot of light in. But the lens is so bad, what they did is they put the light stop up the front. So this 20 millimeter is reduced down to about 10 millimeter. Basically, you might as well just get yourself, take the lenses down, just look through the tube. you will probably be twice as happy using it that way. So probably if you bought yourself a reasonably decent telescope and have it sitting around the house, one of the things you can do is to upgrade it with a decent finder scope. And this is, I didn't even have this on my very first one. I had an Edmunds 3-inch, which I understand you get a lot of money for nowadays as a collector's item. But anyway, it was an F10 3-inch mirror, about this long, and I was young, about 13, 14, I could pick it up and carry it around easily. But it basically had a finder scope on it with a cardboard tube and a couple lenses of some sort in there. And the adjustment was horrible. You could hardly get anything to adjust to be centered. So I just learned the first technique of actually using a telescope was to sight right down the tube. You can do that very easily when you're flexible and young. As you get older, it's a little harder and harder for me to get down on the ground without either throwing my back out or hurting my knees. But the point is, that is actually a very good way to sight in. But you got to do a little practice. But once you get used to it, you can usually get things, if you have a low power eyepiece on your telescope, you can usually get everything close enough that you can recenter it afterwards. So much for this. I'm not going to throw it away because I might use this for a door prize one day for you. And you could throw it away. 6-inch scope that I bought next, which he still has. He's never gotten rid of his. I made a mistake.
I'm still working. I'm still refurbishing it.
Planetarium, and the curator at the planetarium decided I had just bought an 8-inch. Had just got shipped in. I was making up work and everything, and I didn't think I was ever going to need it again. I forgot about when you get sentimentality when you get about 50 years later. But this is what came with it. Much better. This is a real telescope now. It's a doublet lens in it. It's corrected. It even is coated properly. It has a coating, so it's that way. And you can adjust it for focus, and it has a really nice crosshair in here. Now, it's not a nice double crosshair like some of the newer ones have, but it's good enough that I was able to get that 6-inch to point pretty much where I wanted. But on a really dark night, because I was living where it was pretty dark, we didn't even have street lights yet. All we had was porch lights. It got so dark I couldn't see the crosshair. So I got a brain weak bulb and a couple of other things. Jimmy rigged a little device that used to sit right here that illuminated my crosshair. And I even had a little surplus rheostat on it. I did that when I was about 16 or so. You can see I drilled out a hole right there. And if I got everything lined up, I had it illuminated. But I decided to make that, moved it away and moved it to another device on a diagonal and made it into for photography. So I'd have illuminated crosshair to guide my scope. And my scope was basically a camera and a little 50 millimeter F10 and a stick sticking out the back. And I would look in there and nudge. That didn't have clock drive, which you don't have. And anyway, and nudged that, always keeping it as close as I could to the center. And actually got a couple of decent pictures. And at that time, I was going to college. And I was a member of the Seattle Astronomical Society. They had a deal going there for students that were college and high school that they didn't charge you. You just said, come on into the meeting. And they figured if you got really interested, eventually you'd pay us some dues. But it was great. They had coffee and donuts halfway through the program. They usually had somebody give a nice slide presentation before we had PowerPoint. Everybody was close to it. Answered a lot of questions. And I wouldn't give it up for anything. That's part of one reason we got this club started here in Baton Rouge was my experience with another club, and Wally Purcell's experience with the club up in Illinois, I believe.
Also Ohio.
That's
Also
where,
Ohio.
that's where he went to school.
Thought it was Ohio.
It was Ohio, maybe it was Ohio, but anyway, he always said he wanted, his comment is, he said, eventually we want to have a club down here just as good as the one they had up where he was talking about. And I think we probably have now equaled it, so I think he's happy camper at this point. As long as we got everybody working and try to keep it going. And that is another talk for another time, but I do hope that Wally's hard work, getting everything that he did, I did all the blog programming, and Bob took care of the money. And that was basically about 10 to 20 years right there.
And that was
Which
the last we
was a
saw.
newsletter, which I did for almost 35 years.
Yeah.
So I was very happy at the end not have to do it anymore. I don't mind contributing. And by the way, please contribute if you have anything you'd like to add to the newsletter. They want, this is, I told you I'd get off topic. I warned you. But I really, they do a very good, the two of them, him and his wife, do a very good job of putting this newsletter together. But I think they would like to have some variations. One of my ideas, we got a couple of really good dark sky observers. Maybe they could choose a particular object, just one object, like 42 or something. And they could write up a little something, maybe have a couple drawings or add a picture and send it to them.
She's always willing to take articles and stuff. She's looking for them all the time, and if she can't find, doesn't get them, she looks on the internet and finds something that she writes about on.
We should get it, at this point, the club has enough members who've been around long enough that we should be self-sufficient to some extent in generating a lot of our own. That person right there, not Ben, the other one. Don wrote, he was president of this club for a couple of years. And he wrote, when I was news, I had to twist his arm a little bit, but he wrote some of the best articles, for the president's message I've ever seen. And I wish you'd find and republish them. Now, let's get on with this. Okay, so much for cheap finder scopes. The next type on the list, and let me just be sure I haven't lost my place too far. Okay, first off, finder scopes should be our invaluable accessory that attaches to your telescope. You can locate celestial objects before observing them through the main scope. There are three types, and that's where I'm at now. Right angle, straight through, and zero power. Let's start with right angle. These are fairly popular. There's many different types, there are different sizes. This is one I used to use quite a bit for years. It's basically, notice a couple things about it. Let's see if I can get this turned, here we go. So it looks more like a finder scope. And there's a knob here, there we go. Now notice something about it. This is a 50 millimeter lens in here, very similar to the one I made years ago. A little nicer looking, but it is a lot of the same thing. You can focus here if you want, or you have a draw tube you can focus with a little bit. So you can get coarse focus and then fine focus. There's also something else that's very nice. Older finder scopes used to have two sets of rings, one up here and one back here, and they were very cumbersome to adjust. With this, notice, this is spring-loaded. This, on the other hand, are the two knobs, one's at each 90 degrees to each other. And you can adjust this to aim it at any object within the range of this. Now, sometimes you got to jiggle things around a little bit, but basically, it makes for a very nice operation. Now, by the way, this right here, by the way, the name of this company is Ontaries, and they make several different sizes. But the nice thing is they come with, you get the 90-degree one, they come with, I forget what you call it, but a pentaprism.
The diagonal.
But what it does is that everything's right side up and left to right is correct, which makes it a lot easier to find things. Instead of being upside down or mirror image. You know, that's usually what happens. You know, people get frustrated with that. Notice something else, the stock it sits on is about 3 inches high. And so that does give you some clearance from this, from the tube. This can be removed and you can add an extension and have straight through. I've done it. So you can use straight through with it. Notice that this is actually a separate eyepiece. So if you do a straight through, I've got a tube that's about this long and I sit it in there and it focuses beautifully. So if you want straight through, you can do that. But this is a very nice, and I've used it for years, but I upgraded it, about 2 years ago off of this. This was the main scope I used on my bigger scope. This, when I use the word bigger, somebody's gonna cough and say, yeah, it's only 140 millimeter, you know, 5.5 inch roughly. Okay, yeah, it's not a 10-inch knob or 12 inch, you know, or a 25 inch, yeah, but I'm living in town, I can't easily go out anymore. But on the other hand, it is an F7 refractor, and it's highly corrected. So what I do see is nice, beautiful, sharp images with it. And actually a very dark field, which helps compensate for light pollution. So much for tech equipment. This, on the other hand, is a good example of a right angle. Next would be a straight through. Well, I've sort of already demonstrated straight through. Simplest was this one I showed you, or the others, toy, or this, the one I built myself years ago. Those are all straight through. Oh, let me mention one thing about straight through. Everybody says, well, it's hard to hold them like this. But if you raise them up high enough off the tube where you get to them, there's a technique called double, where you use both your eyes. It's harder for me to do it since my eyesight on my right eye was screwed up by a doctor to some extent. But in any case, what you can do is you can leave both eyes open, and you can literally, you know, it's bright star, you can move the telescope into the bright stars on this. And when the two meet properly, you are on the center of the star. And that's without crosshairs, if you don't want to use them. Next is the zero power.
Yeah, but we want more power.
No, zero power. No more power.
You can always go negative, just turn the flame around.
The next type is the zero power fiber.
One power.
I'm going to show you
Technically,
a
it's
couple of
one power.
good examples.
This is lighting.
Somebody found this and their batteries dead.
Technically, it's not zero power, it's one power.
Yeah, well, it's zero, meaning zero, you were not magnifying.
Zero magnet.
But if you want to say no power or
One power.
one power,
It's times one, not
it
times
all
zero.
works just fine with me.
Times zero is just blind logic.
Yeah, well, I'm just telling you what they have in the catalog that I read. It's under zero power.
We should write a letter.
Yeah. Oh, this does come on. I thought you told me it wasn't working. Well, not very well. We need some lights down in a minute. But anyway, I don't know what happened, but it came on and it went right back out.
Oh, sometimes the.
It must be that the battery is right at the point of no return. But that's a very nice one. You'll see a lot of the members of our club and other clubs use these. They're a little bit on the heavy side. They use AAA batteries, you know. The one nice, and they do have a way to dim the field. Now, you can buy adapters that fit over the top of this to help keep the dew off, for instance. Or you can actually find dew zappers that will fit over these, and you can use a battery to keep, so you can see without the dew building up. And there's a whole area of having problems with dew in Louisiana, in Mississippi, anybody close to the Gulf. It's an unusual night. when the humidity is much less than 50%.
Can you tell us how it works? How does it work? How does it work?
It works very good.
Oh! It's really good. You turn it on, and there's three knobs. When you get a bright star in the middle, you turn these knobs until it's in the center. It has 3 circles. It has one circle is about a half a degree, and another circle that's roughly 2 degrees, and the last circle I think is either 4 or 6 degrees. I can't quite remember what it is. But it doesn't make any difference because, as somebody pointed out to me, you can buy books and they will have on the side a Telerad symbol. And if you're really good and you can transfer that to a template of some sort, like a piece of plastic, you can actually use that to map out the sky a little bit so you can see how far things are apart and so on. But there's another way to do it. You can buy one. This goes to my star atlas, and I have several star atlases. One is my first one, Norton's, which goes way back, and then this one I bought probably 30 years ago. It's called Atlas of the Heavens. Yeah, it's an epic 1950. But guess what? If you're star hopping, it makes no difference. Even if you're using a computer, it only makes things off by a little bit. The sky moves pretty darn slow when it comes to changes in position. But what you can do is, let me find a nice one. This one came with several nice features. You've got this right here, and you can do an overlay, and it gives you right section, declination, and you can actually lay it out. It's going to be a little hard for me to do this, but I'm going to try. And you can lay it down, and you can actually plot the position. Now, the reason I like these, and both of these, I took a standard constellation grid and plotted it on both of these. Because I did a lot by sight rather than trying to, in fact, when I first started, there were no computers, maybe big observatories, and they were analog for the most part. So anyway, what you can also do is do an overlay. This actually has a little magnifier built in, and you can lay this out for the Telerad. Do this to make it easier to handle. The paper is actually starting to get a little bit yellow. It used to be a bright white. When it gets brown, it'll be time for me to go, and somebody else can have it.
So, looks right to me. You sure your typewriters are okay?
No, it's getting a little bit. It used to be real white. I guess they didn't use, but you can lay this Telerad over this, and so you can actually measure the position, put the object you're looking for, and you can see what other stars lie within it. Or you can take the Telerad and put it on one side, and if that's 4 degrees, then that's going to be 8 degrees across. So what you get is you can actually measure positions that way and use it for what's called star hopping, of which is a very old technique of finding things. But do keep in mind, star hopping does not require a computer. It does not require anything more than a good chart. And if everybody else's power goes out, you're still in business.
But it does require you to be able to see the stars, so it doesn't work too well.
Yeah, when the power goes out, yeah, you can't use your computer to find it, I think, because you didn't ever learn the basics. Just keep that in mind. So anyway, I'll leave this out for everybody to look at. And if somebody wants a good laugh, they can see my old chart. There's another book out there called Pocket Star Atlas, very similar to this, but it gets a little more depth. But the cool thing about this one, it gives you right in it nice objects that they plotted out to look for, most of the masonry objects and so on, but also a lot of basic information at the front. Some of it a lot more detailed than most people are going to ever need.
Craig, I think the Pocket Sky Atlas actually comes with a little plastic insert with the circles on it.
It does.
No,
Yeah.
mine has.
Mine didn't.
Is it?
No,
And when I bought the bigger
I've seen-
versions, because my eyes are getting, when
The bigger
I bought the
version.
bigger version, anybody,
The,
Got both of them. I didn't.
Because
the
I've seen
Astronomical
it.
I see upstairs has one, but I've not seen theirs.
maybe you have to buy it separately.
I know,
I mean,
I've
that's
seen
usually,
like a little pocket for it. So.
okay, well, I actually, for my,
But I've seen it.
tell you the
Yeah,
truth,
an obsolete edition.
for my Norton Star Atlas, I actually made one with the circles and everything, matched my finder. So I had overlay, I had a little piece of plastic I worked with. But when I took the book to the school library to get it rebound, with papers was falling apart, somehow it fell out in some place at Central Library, floor of Central Library's, probably was swept up at this point.
Yeah, vacuum
That
cleaner
doesn't make any difference. We'll take care of that. Okay, these are zero power, but this is, I'm gonna tell you, there's all kinds of zero power. A fairly inexpensive one, I think is, I know Celestron makes one, and I'm sure other companies do. It just puts a point on the sky. That's all it does.
Hold on a
It's a
second.
little red point up on the sky.
That window is also a 2-degree field of view. The window that is, the red dot is in, is a 2-degree field of view.
One other thing,
Or
it is,
four.
the way it's made, it doesn't do up as fast as some of the others do, but it still does up, I'm afraid. That's always a problem. When you go, if you go out to deep south stargaze, unless we get some really dry nights, you're gonna come out and you can scrape the water off your equipment and drink it after, in the morning. It's pure water, it's just dew, but it's,
Yeah, but where's your-
well, you might want to remove these spiders in my plant. But this is a nice little device, it's very simple, you can, by turning one knob here, this turns it off and on, and you're welcome to take a look, and all it does is put a dot, and with the amount of light we have in here, it's hard to see it, but once you get it correctly adjusted, you can see that red dot. And by the way, some of the problems that some of these have is they're too bright. There's two ways to handle that. The way I handle one of my units, the more expensive one that's on my telescope, is I put a little piece of red cellophane over it to help dim it down. And the other method, a friend of mine told me, but I haven't done it, when I was out, I was saying it was too bright, it was, I forget, deep south about 4 or 5 years ago. And he said, just let the battery start to die.
There you go.
When the battery, as the battery gets weaker, so does the dots.
The one thing about those is they're notorious for not working. You twist the knob on, I don't know if it's a brand thing, but you twist the knob and the light may or may not come on. When I got my 8-inch scope, the one that shipped with my scope did not work. So for a short period of time, I learned, like you're talking about getting down and into the tube of the scope and sighting it in that way. I learned to star hop that way without a finder when I first started.
You know, if you got yourself you can make yourself a pair of gun sights to put on your tube.
Well, that's what, I don't know if anybody's got rifles or anything, but I mean, that's essentially a
They
reflex
actually
sight.
fixed the, one of the 6-inchers up in the front is done up that way. Instead of.
I apologize for my lack of hearing. I had my hearing aids laid out, but I was in such a rush to leave. They're at home on the desk. So some people's voices, like yours, are coming through just fine. His voice, it's not that he doesn't speak loud enough, but it's ignoring.
That's for the best.
That's
Nobody likes the.
There's the privilege of age. Okay. It's called selective hearing. My grandmother used it very effectively. She was thrown in a swimming pool, lost her eardrum on one side, and you always knew if she was interested enough to know which side of her head she pointed towards you. But she always was very polite. This is my favorite. It's called, put out by a company called Rigel. And I believe it's called a Quick Finder. Notice it's very, compared to this is probably a fifth the weight or less. It comes with several bases and the bases, you know, snap in, and the one is made for up to 4-inch tubes, and the other one can go up to 8 or 9-inch tubes. They're just curved a little differently. All they do is snap in. Well, easier said than done, like this. Here we go.
I will add one good thing about that, is that's one of the few
There.
like spine.
Anyway, there's a hole in the middle where you can attach it with the single, or you can put straps across here, rubber bands, all kinds of different ways to put it in there. The battery goes in here. It's just a little button battery, a 324, I believe, a 3024. Is that right? Yeah, 3024. Doesn't make any difference. When you view, everybody has a tendency to turn it this way because all your knobs are back here and everything. Read the instructions. It says view. You got to look this way to see the reticle. If you don't, that's from, this adjusts the tilt. So until you get everything centered, it has only 2 circles to fool with. One's a 1/2 degree, and the other one's a 2-degree circle. And this right here makes it brighter or dimmer, but this one has this tendency to, I can't even see it, and there's so much light in here. There it goes. I can see it now. I have to look away, but I'm going to pass it around. Please don't drop it. And there's another knob you can turn here, and it blinks. You can make it blink faster or slower. Now, why do that? Because if you get just the right rate and keep the reticle at a fairly low, you hardly affect your night vision at all with it. It's a very well thought out. They also make an attachment. These little button batteries only last 40 or 50 hours. But they make an attachment that goes on the side that plugs into the bottom. You know, I think it's 2 AAA batteries that are in there. It's a 3-volt system, and it's supposed to go almost 1,000 hours with it, or something like that. That's a big difference, especially, you know, a battery like this after a couple of nights is probably going to be dead. But that little attachment they sell for $12.95 will keep you going for all 5 days of the deep south, for instance. But anyway, just remember when you look in this direction, and you can't really do too much damage to it, except you're gonna have to look for something dark to look into, like over here. If you don't look in the lights, you won't see anything. So it's better. But to feel how light that is, I'm gonna pass the telerad around now, and you can feel the difference. And if you're out there and you're trying to balance your telescope, you've got a knob, and you put that on the knob, you're gonna have to put a little counterweight or something on the back. This one, you probably won't need to do anything. You'll just be able to use it straight as is. Okay? Now, so much for the ad lib. Next thing is alignment, because if these things aren't aligned correctly, it makes no difference, absolutely no difference how well they work, because you might think it's over there when you look with your finder scope, but when you look in the eyepiece of your telescope, it may be over here. So how do you get the two to it? Well, it's a 2-stage step. Stage 1 is daytime alignment, which is the easiest thing to do. In daytime alignment, all you do is you take your telescope and you find a tree or a light pole, but you want something off in the distance. The only thing I would recommend strongly not doing is deciding to use the sun as what your alignment tool will be. Not only will you burn out the reticle, but you will do the same thing for your eye.
And make sure your neighbor doesn't think you point the telescope at their house.
Yeah.
It could be interesting to see what happens. I've got a feeling it would not be good on the reticle, because these reticles are usually a plastic-like material, and they will probably sort of melt on you. Anyway, just a warning. I don't want anybody going home saying, he said we should align with something in the distance. I decided to use the sun. No, I'm I'm saying, don't use the sun. Please don't use the sun.
Radio towers. were-
I used to set up my telescope. I would aim it about this angle, and there was a tree way off in the distance that was half dead, and it had a fork in it, like this. And it was sort of off by itself, nothing blocking the view. And I would get the telescope aimed at that fork. And then I would bring the finder scope so that it was also aiming at the fork by making some adjustment. And I locked everything down so nothing's moving. And very easy to do, but then you need to do what's called fine alignment, and that has to occur at nighttime. So your nighttime alignment usually requires, doesn't have to be, but a fairly bright star. You don't have to go for the brightest star in the sky. I prefer it to be low in the sky like this. That way, when you're looking through your telescope, your finder, when you loosen things up, it's not sliding off and hitting the ground. Or you can use some rubber bands if you want. Rubber bands work fantastically well if you do them just right. If you've got, if you got the type of rings where you got 3 screws and 3 screws, you take your rubber bands, you go around the tube from one screw to the other, and do the same thing and adjust it right. That puts enough tension to keep it on those 2 bottom screws, and then you can move it back and forth until you get everything centered on the bottom, and then you bring down the top screw to secure it, and you're set. And you're now probably won't have to touch it again unless you go down on Louisiana bumpy roads.
Yeah.
We'll have to make some adjustments. Yeah. Just tell them next time you talk to the transit road authorities in Baton Rouge, I'm tired of having to realign my telescope every time I drive down Plank Road.
Time on Plank Road.
They're not going to overlook some to you. They don't care. They said, yeah, but you will care when you break something on your car, especially if you hit a pothole. So that's how the nighttime works, and then it's pretty simple and straightforward. Okay. As I said, I digress, but I won't digress too much more at this point. The finder scope is best for a Newtonian. Everybody I read said this is best for a Newtonian because you can look down. There's a problem. What's the problem?
You're pointing that way. You need to see what you're pointing at first.
And you're looking at the ground, or you're looking over here. There's a trick we were talking about. There's a little trick. It does take practice, and I worked on it for years. Especially when I was using this, I would get the telescope and I would just leave both eyes open, and I would get this centered star, concentrating on this, and then I discovered if I leave both eyes open, it worked just fine. I didn't have to try to do this, especially if it's dark outside. It just takes some practice. It actually makes finding things faster in some ways.
Yeah, the main issue and why most people say they like a right angle finder is to be nice to their back. Looking through a straight, if you're pointing it up, you have to get behind it like this.
Yeah.
Until, and if you're low on the horizon, you have to do this. If you point straight up, it's even worse, because then you have to get like that. If you have a right angle finder, you're looking down, it's more comfortable. So if you want, and you can afford the weight on the front end of your scope, they make dual dovetails. So if you want to do a reflex sight on one side and a right angle finder on the other, you're going to be a little tall, but that may be the way to go.
You have a good solution. My solution was I bought a nice 1 power finder. 0 is the way I call it. But 1 power, that's right, 1 power. And I put them both on the telescope. So I can get pretty close to the object using a 1 power and switch over to the finder to finally get the final centering. So that worked just great. Anyway, so my suggestion is if you get a right angle you think about either doing like you suggested with another telescope on the other side or something going straight through, or look at a 0 or 1 power finder to add to your scope. And if you get a little thing like the Rigel I was showing you, we still haven't passed around. Okay. It's, that Rigel would be very nice because it doesn't take much weight. In fact, you might mount it right on top of your finder scope. And depending on how heavy everything is. I realize with Dobsonians, you have a problem with too much weight, then you gotta start adding weights to the back of the scope, things like that. But I have the same problem, even on an equatorial mount. Now, do you need a finder scope for a go-to? After all, doesn't the go-to just do everything you need it to do?
It won't whistle.
Except when it's not working right, or it's not aligned correctly, or the power goes out. So it's nice to still have the finder scope there. So the main purpose on a go-to, the finder still serves a purpose, and it should be actually part of the observing equipment. I would not throw the finder out. It will help with the initial alignment, especially if you're going out into the country to sub your scope, and you have to align your telescope and you have all that go-to stuff on there. You still got to get the initial stars in the right place. Then you got to enter some information, and the finder will make it a little bit faster and easier to get the stars centered in your telescope.
Unless you got a GPS on your stand.
Well, that even doesn't, we were back a few years ago, we had major solar flare and GPS went up too. I mean, everything except the power went out. Well, I have to take that back. I think part of Macomb actually went out. That's when we were still up at the original Deep South. We were close to Macomb. Anyway, color alignment is just, it still helps. One of the biggest problems with polar alignment, it has to be accurate for everything else to work properly. And that means you got to actually do some manipulating. Now, some of the mounts like mine, I have a Sky Commander. I have 1 star or 2 star setup. I use 1 star, which is fast. It's pretty good because I have it up in the observatory where I can, it's pretty well aligned already. But if I was out in the field, I would probably want to use 2 star, and that will start compensating for other problems in trying to use go-to. Or in my case, it's push-to. And there's nothing wrong with push-to. It's good exercise at my age. The biggest exercise is not breaking my back, sending it up. If you have a permanent setup, maybe you could get away without using it, but it's sort of nice to have one. Today, here's something interesting. Who's in here with astrophotography right now? Anybody? I know you are. You're sort of, you're astrophotography. You're on 6-inch astrophotography. Take your iPhone, put it up to the pictures. Anyway, some people are taking their finder scopes, like I have. They remove the back end of it, and they put in an electronic.
Guide scope.
What do you call it? The
Guide
camera, like electronic camera, or something, and they can hook it into their mount, and they can use that to track objects with. It's very interesting.
Called guide zip.
So you can still use your finder scope, but you might be able to use it in a different way you never thought of. So it's not that it's just like everything else. So it's maturing and things are changing.
One really great use for a guide scope that you may not have mentioned yet is that because the guide scope has a naturally built-in super wide field of view, if you're using a very narrow field of view on your telescope, I found occasionally,
Is that the problem?
very, very large, like the North American Nebula or something like that. You can actually just look through the
Now, my last thing I said at the end, and I think I already mentioned it, a finder-scope can come in awful handy still when the power goes out. If you can still use your telescope at all. Unfortunately, some scopes, that's one reason I like Los Mondi, I can use them any way I want to. I could go buy the packet, which makes it go to. I could hook it up like I have it right now with Sky Commander and just do push to. Or I got huge setting circles on it. I can go the old-fashioned way. Which, by the way, that could be a whole different discussion about how to use setting circles. If you got good ones, you can do amazing things with them still. Okay. Now, here by a finder-scope, and I'm just going to read over it if you have questions. Okay, look at the construction. This should not be loosely fitted. It should have, shouldn't shake it and sound like glasses inside it or something like that. That just, should be checked. Optics need to be fairly sharp. It don't have to be sharp, real sharp on the edge of the field, but it should be where you can still see stars. And the lenses should be multi-coated, and it should have a dew shield. Well, duh. This one sort of has a dew shield. You see how deep that lens is back there? It's that far back. So basically, it's a dew shield. But even in Louisiana, it gets so wet that you might want to wrap this with something else to keep retain the heat.
You go to a craft store, buy that little foam, and then stick some Velcro on it and make a circle, and there you go. Is that what you got?
Yeah. I got actually a dew zapper from a person down in New Medford who makes them. Very well built. You got to buy your dewing equipment separately, but the basic unit itself is not power hungry because he's just this amazing person who built an electrical engineer, and he took all the problems. And the only place you could buy them I know of is here in Louisiana. Hope you'll be there. This is what I use. Maybe a rubber band or a piece of Velcro like that. And that not only is a dew shield, but it retains the heat here. So that we can go for quite a while before this would go. This is what, as I said, this is what I used to use years ago. This would still work even on this. Even though it has a nice long dew shield, it'd be easy just to wrap a piece around this to help retain the heat off the metal. Metal radiates heat quickly, which is fine if you're trying to get your telescope to equalize, but not good for other reasons. Now, lastly, the very last one says, what about a small refractor? I started thinking about that. I've fooled around with stuff for years. I got this little I got this 5.5 inch, very nice refractor I use. But sometimes I wanted to have something with a wider field of view or something. So, for a reasonable price, I went to Astronomics and bought one of their little telescopes, beautifully built. Nice thing, it is a telescope. And I can focus. It has a nice dew shield to it. I could, if I wanted to, there's a place where I could actually mount another finder, like a 0 or 1 power. So it's very well done, and it slips on my telescope in such a way that I can use this to help trim out my telescope weight-wise, so that I have it. So if I put something heavier on the back, if I needed to, like if I were doing camera work or anything, I could slide this forward. If I need, if it's a little front heavy, I can slide it back. But I love it. It's basically a 3-inch, back to the same scope I started with, except it's a refractor. And a lot more expensive than $28 my dad spent. But it's a beautiful little refractor that's not cracks, what do they call that, it doesn't have 3 lenses.
It's a doublet.
It's a doublet, but it's a well-built still, and it does have an ED glass in there. So it works quite nice. The beautiful thing about it is when I'm using one scope, I can have this set for a lower power. And so that works very nice. So I'll leave this out here, but anybody drops it, it's theirs. It costs you about $500. So everything is basically covered, that I was going to cover, minus all the side things. But I am going to pass these out. This is, just pass them around. This is a little trick I have been doing with I have Sky Safari. And I've been certain things like comments, things like that.
They put the disclaimer.
Each one's a little different.
As is, like, wow. Like, they wouldn't do it.
There, there's 3 of them. You can pass them around over here. As you can see, it'll generate finding maps. It puts in my eyepiece I'm using. I have a place where you can enter the eyepiece and the field of view and everything will be plotted out. And so it's a nice way, like when I was trying to find a comet a while back, things like that. So I sort of knew where to look in the sky with it. Okay, now you're welcome to throw oranges, tomatoes, but if you really like it, I prefer honey.
I got 2 things to say.
I want you to take over, my feet are starting to kill me.
Well, so,
I'm gonna sit down.
if y'all
Let
go
you sit for a
to,
second. Thank you.
if y'all ever get a chance to go into the big star parties, Okotex, TSP,
Let me grab a coffee before we knock it over.
need that. You're gonna see the big scopes, and you're gonna be amazed by the big scope. But you're gonna laugh because you'll see a little refractor or reflector mounted on top of this gigantic scope, and that's what they use their finder scope. I think Joey had one on a 17 at Hodges, didn't he? I think he had a little reflector.
Cooney used to have like.
Well,
It's just funny. You go up and you see this big scope, but they've got a scope that's maybe bigger than yours sitting on top, and they use that as their finder
We have
scope.
a 24 f5-24 with a 6-inch reflector on the back of it for a finder scope.
But now to go into the gutter a little bit, so close your ears if you don't want to hear anything. But if you go to Okotex, go to PSP, same sort of thing, they have a giveaway, right? And there's a guy in Okotex, I don't know if he's still there, but he cannot say the word reticle. He pronounces it rectal. So if you would like to go to Okotex and win yourself a rectal scope, by all means, go to Okotex. Because you will hear the entire group bust out laughing because he can't say the word reticle. But, it's useful. An illuminated finder, I don't know, you kind of brushed up against that, but having an illuminated finder is great. It's got the crosshairs in there, line it right up with what you need. I'm not a fan of the tail rads, I'm not a fan of, I kind of like the Rigel. But straight through for me. But I use Sky Safari for my star charts. If I have the chart in front of me, I go right to the eyepiece and I'm off and running. These catalogs, what do your catalogs go down to? What magnitude?
That's 8 magnitude.
8. So if you're hunting
But
down,
in my Sky, I got the Pro Edition, and I think I can set it all the way down to 20th magnitude or something like that. It goes way down there. But it's well beyond what I need.
and see, that's the thing, it's not enough for what I need in most cases. So your finder scope is only as good as the chart that you're using to accompany it. That's the last thing I'd say.
My only last comment is, this is to help John and also our vice president and stuff. I volunteered to do this, a month ago. It took a little bit, I had to spend part of the evening putting my notes together. But as you saw, I don't pay attention to that anyway. But if you have something to contribute, maybe just visual dark sky observing or solar observing, a piece of equipment you bought recently that you'd like to, present to the club. Any of those things. Talk to John or a vice president, because it is hard. We cannot depend upon LSU to do all the programming. Now, I'm going to give it back, John. I'm going to turn it over to you in a second, but this is very important. When we first started a club, I did some research because I always wondered why we didn't have a club here. Back in the 50s, there was an adult club that was started at LSU. And I happened to talk to one of the professors who was involved with it. And he said, the reason it died is because they expected the LSU to do all the programs for them. And he said, we don't have the time to do it. We can do maybe one a year or two, something like that, but we can't, occupy ourselves being the president, vice president, all that sort of thing. We've got our own organizations belong to. The next group, so that one after a couple of years, it failed. The next one was started by high school students. It failed for obvious reasons. The students graduate from high school and disappear. So this is the third chance. And if you want to keep it going, that means you need to look at helping John with things he needs to have done. And he's going to give you a list of them in just a second.
That's it. Okay, thank you very much, sir. We've all been talking during, is there any more questions you might want to ask about finder scopes? Anyone? Okay, then, assuming that'll be it then, so I guess we'll end our live streaming now, and we'll go on to a little bit of club business after that. We ended it, Scott.